Let me just double check. All right, everyone, welcome to tonight's traffic and pedestrian safety meeting, or committee meeting, I should say. Tonight is November 13th, 2024. Before we kind of walk into tonight's meeting, I would like to just put out a couple of notices, if you will. One, tonight we do have a special presentation on California's daylighting law. Today it'll be kind of short and sweet, but at least we'll get to introduce a little bit of information regarding that. And I know we've discussed it before, so we thought it would be valuable to have it here tonight. And secondly, I'd just like to note that every year in November, we like to show our appreciation for our commissions and committee members. So I just want to thank you guys for everything that you do. And thank you for all the time that you devote to us here in TAPS every month and in between, because I know there's a lot to think about in between. But yeah, we just want you guys to know that you're a valuable conduit to the community in the city of Pinole, and we're grateful to have you guys as the public's advocate or mouthpiece for their concerns in the city. So again, thank you guys. All right. Faith, would you like to, or our chair, I should say, would you like to lead us to the Pledge of Allegiance today? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next slide, please. We can start with our roll call tonight. Our committee member, Ben Doyle.
Present.
Our chair, Faith Denham-Sims.
Present.
Member Kent Moriarty.
I'm here.
And member Crystal Pasco.
Present.
All right. And tonight for staff, we have me, Mia Hubner, to get through the presentation today. Next slide, please. If we would like to move forward with the approval of the minutes, would anybody like to open that approval?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from October 9th meeting.
Would anybody like to second that?
Second.
Okay, one run through committee member Ben Doyle,
Approve.
Chair Faith Denham-Sims,
Approve.
member Kent Moriarty,
Approve.
and member Crystal Pasco.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. I'd like to open the floor tonight for the committee members' reports and communications. If this is a good time for any committee reports, any announcements that you might have, or especially any committee requests for any future agenda items. So if anybody would like to start, please. Looks like nothing for today. All right. Thank you. For our next slide, we have the floor open to any citizens to be heard. Again, these should be a time for anything that's not on the agenda. And if you have any comments or would like to call in, please raise your hand on the in the Zoom meeting, and please try and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Okay. We currently have no callers, so if we can move to the next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, today we'll have a special presentation regarding the California daylighting law, also known as Assembly Bill 413. If we can move to the next slide, please. So the slide is generally describing what the California daylighting law is. Essentially, the Assembly Bill 413 is also known as, of course, California's daylighting law. It was introduced by Assemblymember Alex Lee. California was one of 10 states that didn't necessarily have a law restricting parking near crosswalks or intersections, despite the high rate of pedestrian injuries and fatalities in California. And so they thought it was imperative to introduce this law and join the rest of the states that have it. It was approved on October 10th by the governor in 2023. Again, we recommend visiting the link that is at the bottom of the slide for more information regarding the law. You can read it in more detail and at length. For the next slide, please. Okay, so essentially the California daylighting law will create a new section of the vehicle code, CVC 22500. It's become illegal since January 1st, 2024 to stop, stand, or park within 20 feet of any intersection. So that is for any vehicle, essentially of any type besides an emergency vehicle, to essentially block the intersection's view within 20 feet of the crosswalk. And it's also within 15 feet of any crosswalk or curb extension. So we'll talk later a little bit more about where those are affected. However, prior to January 1st, 2025, only warnings were issued for violations. They weren't necessarily, given tickets or citations at the time. I think it was a time to kind of practice the law and get into the mindset of it. So unless the area was clearly marked with a painted curb or a sign, I think they gave kind of a rest year to catch up to that. Next slide, please. So again, what's daylighting? And daylighting is the concept that safety is improved by removing visibility blocking obstructions, such as parked vehicles near intersections. Daylighting in intersections improve safety by obviously increasing visibility, improving reaction time, which can in turn slow down the turning vehicles. Next slide, please. So some might ask, why do we need this? It's essentially, as we've described in the slide previously, to increase visibility in order to hopefully reduce potentially lethal collisions, not, with just pedestrians, but anything that could be within the intersection, and to also comply with California's law. Next slide, please. So this image is trying to show essentially what that reaction time view would be. So as you can see in the left image, there's a vehicle parked fairly close to the intersection or where the crosswalk begins. And the idea is if anyone were to step out behind that vehicle, you don't necessarily see them or react to them at a proper time, because most roads and safety safety implementations, I should say, are based off of sight distance and reaction time. So if you can imagine somebody stepping out from around the corner, sometimes they can't see you coming and you can't see them coming. So I think it's beneficial for not only the pedestrians, but for the drivers. So if you can see in the image on the right, with that obstacle removed, you can now see when the person's about to step off the crosswalk, and you're more able to react, slow down, and potentially yield or stop to the pedestrian. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this image, again, is trying to reflect basically what was what was, I guess, allowed, I guess you can say, before the daylighting law. Again, as you can see in that car's position, they're already getting very close to the crosswalk. You have vehicles parked within 15 to 20 feet of the crosswalk. And again, your sight distance on either side or your visibility on either side is pretty cut off. And, common sense would say, if you can't see it, you can't react to it. Next slide, please. So after the daylighting law is implemented, now obviously the driver has a wide view of the entire crosswalk, of pedestrians on either side of the crosswalk. And I think it's also helpful if, for cyclists who might be coming around the corner or going down a bike lane, if that's a shared, if there's room on the lane for that. Next slide, please. So the slide, how does it work? Essentially, it's kind of like the images we just showed on a two-way crosswalk, or cross street, I should say. Only the space on the right side approaching a crosswalk as one is driving is affected. So essentially, the driver, anything that could be on your right side oncoming, definitely has to have the 20 feet implemented. On a one-way street, both the left and the right curb areas, so 20 feet from the crosswalk, are no parking zones. Municipalities are allowed to paint zones larger than 20 feet. I think we could add also that even though the first 2 points that we have on this slide says that there's a differentiation on a two-way street versus a one-way street, some municipalities can also implement no parking zones for 20 feet on every side of the intersection, as opposed to just what's oncoming. If there's no paint or signs, the 20 feet distance still applies. So for anyone who says, well, the curb isn't painted or we don't have a sign put up already, basically it doesn't matter that all public and drivers should know that if within 20 feet of a crosswalk or intersection, we can't have parking anymore. If it's painted, of course, you still would follow the usual red curb prohibition, and the same thing if there's signs already there next to the crosswalk. Next slide, please. Again, this is a broader, a broader depiction of what the bullet points discussed in the last slide. So as you can see, I'll just call it the north side of that intersection. Essentially, anything that is on the driver's view oncoming towards him needs to be cleared. There's a few other examples on either side of what is proper implementation of the daylighting law and what is essentially possible or allowed. So on some sides you see there's just the first vehicle scratched out and then the other one has two, basically to show what the 20 feet or 20 feet plus would look like. If you'd like to move to the next slide, please. This is essentially an example of like how the red curb would be painted. So obviously most curbs, or we should say what crosswalks we should have are ADA. And so some people will ask, well, where does that 20-foot line start? So as you can see in the drawings here, it should start at the end of the wing of the cross of the ramp that pedestrians or cyclists or whoever in a wheelchair needs to come down to and cross that street. So we've highlighted in red essentially where that red curb can start. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to, if anyone wants to know, how the city has reached out, we've tried to practice community outreach on this new law by using PCTV broadcast channels, number 26 and 28. Those were scheduled regularly, throughout January 2025. We've also had them on city website news. featuring, and it was featured on our homepage August through September. Social media has also had posts regarding this law. So that would be on Facebook, Instagram, Nextdoor, and X. The posts were on it's August 20th, 2024. It was also written about in the Pulse for August 22nd, 2024. Again, they wanted to reiterate that this is especially important for children who are already, a lot less visible. And we are, I should say, beginning to strongly focus on this law particularly in school zones or, park areas that would generally have a lot of children and pedestrian activity. Next slide, please. So some ask, does daylighting actually work? And so studies have shown that when cities limit the parking immediately next to intersections, accidents can be reduced up to 30%. With that, we can move on to the next slide, where we can open the floor to any questions and answering, and that could be from callers or visitors or the panel here.
Does the city have plans to go around painting curbs red?
Is it on? Hello. Oh, yeah. So, yes, we have not just made plans for future, but we have already started doing this. There are several intersections that we already painted. Although painting is not required for the law to be enforced, we have, like Mia said, focused on schools. So there's Pinole Valley Road close to the schools. We have done several intersections, Tennant Avenue close to parks. So we have done several of them. We still have to finish evaluating the complete city. There are some parks, for example, that are not very well attended. There's not a lot of traffic, so that wouldn't be cost effective to stripe, not just because the cost of striping is not that high, but the maintenance in future, it'll be a bigger impact on the city. So we have to be strategic of what needs to be striped and what's going to be most effective for safety. But yeah, we definitely have a plan to continue to do it and finish up all the intersections that we think are necessary.
Forgive me, can you introduce yourself for any of the viewers who haven't met you yet?
Oh, yes. My name is Fabi Guillen. I'm the CAP and Environmental Manager for the City of Pinole.
Thank you.
First, I wanted to say that was a great presentation, and I thank you for doing it. And the community outreach has been really good, too. I've seen this come up in a number of places, so thanks. Yeah.
I did want to add to that. On the outreach that we did, it was very strategically focused to schools. And so that's why it was done during the summer, before school came back to session after the summer. And that's why we focused the efforts around that time so that kids, pedestrians, and bicycles, and more importantly, drivers were aware of what they needed to do and how this would work. So we really did that very intentionally before school started.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had one question. You said that the city is not going to red stripe everywhere where parking's not allowed, just in more of the high impact areas because of cost. I wonder do we know if other cities are doing that or not? It seems like where there's not red, people will park, even if the law says it doesn't have to be painted red.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is that if it's not painted red, people will park there, and the law will be ineffective in those cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder if the city would consider doing it everywhere where daylighting is mandated, or if it's just. You said you've been looking at the scope. I just wonder how how many linear feet of painting would we be talking about if the city signed up to do it everywhere where daylighting is mandated?
I would have to look at that. I don't have that exact figure. I know there's, we're developing an additional map it's going to be presented tomorrow again. I'm going to present this again tomorrow at the council meeting. And we're going to have a map with the target areas in those that are high impact, high traffic. The total linear footage I don't have, but we can probably take a look and see if we can come up with that and research it. And I think it's more, not necessarily the initial installation, is more the maintenance and having to refresh it, periodically, since we have a lot of other stuff that we need to do that's related to safety. Just with limited resources, we have to be very strategic. But we can look into that and see.
It sounds like Public Works has already decided not to do it everywhere, just in the high impact areas. And it kind of seems like that should still be kind of open for discussion.
Yeah, I don't think that it's been decided. I think we have only made a plan to move forward with the high impact areas. But I'm not excluding every intersection that is not high impact. But if you were to look at a residential location, for example, a court, that would be very low impact, I would say. There's some places where there's only a few cars that turn or need to park. So those areas are pretty, I would say, low impact.
Okay. Thanks.
Quick question. So just kind of piggybacking off of that, if residents were to request, like in their neighborhood or somewhere where it was not on the high impact list, would the city be open to doing that?
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think that we would always be open to studying and taking a look, analyzing, and making sure. I'm sure that we can consult with folks like you and experts to make sure that makes sense. So I couldn't say yes or no. I think that we would be always open to analyzing, because obviously we don't see every intersection, and just like with speed limits and other stuff, there's special conditions for a lot of them. So I think that we would always be open to at least studying it and making sure that the decision is the right decision for that specific location.
Great, thanks.
Just for clarification of the law, so it's at every intersection, whether or not there is a painted crosswalk and or mid-block crossings where there is a crosswalk?
I believe that it is, if you can make a turn, that's where as you approach traffic, if you go on your, I guess it was the right side, as you go, if you can turn and there's a crosswalk, people cannot park. And then, like, for example, one that is not like that is, I was trying to think. I can't remember. No, but I think it's the approach. So I would have to look at that specifically. But I think it's the 20 feet is when somebody is going to go on the crosswalk. If you can block that person with a vehicle, then it's important to step back the 20 feet or the 15 feet, depending on what it is.
Not every intersection has painted crosswalks, though. So that was my question, if it still applies, because it's not legally mandated for there to be crosswalks. And then there's, down the middle of a long street, there's crosswalks for people to get across. Would it also apply to parking around those crosswalks?
If it helps, can we move back 4 slides, please? One more? That one? I think this one might illustrate what you're asking. So if you notice on the, I guess, the right and bottom intersection, they have a painted crosswalk, and they've limited the 20 feet. But if you notice on the upper and the left, it also illustrates kind of what you're saying. There's not a painted crosswalk, but they still have the 20 feet cleared out, because that's part of the visibility of where if they can make a right turn there, there's still a visibility issue. And of course, people tend to cross and do things at intersections, whether it's painted or not. So I want to say that this image is what illustrates your question. Am I on the same page?
Yeah, that,
Okay.
yeah, because they are showing it blocked off and there are no crosswalks painted on those two legs of the intersection. But I would still be interested to know if it's going to apply to mid-block crossings where there are painted crosswalks, because those can be just as deadly with, you can't see someone waiting to cross with the big van parked right there, and they're stepping into the crosswalk just as they're in your line of sight. So I would think that those should be a priority if you are going to paint, to do the mid-block crossings where there are crosswalks.
Okay, I will look into that. I want to say we have an example like that, and it is painted. I think it may be in front of the school. But I was doing that slide for tomorrow as well. So, but I'll double check, and what I'll do is I'll also reread the law, just to make sure there is a provision for that as well. But it makes sense, obviously, to clear the line of sight for the driver at any intersection. So, but I will double check and follow up. Thank you.
Yeah, also just to add to that, yeah, I really echo what our chair just said, because there are potentially crosswalks that have no signals and very, very low visibility, or even like flashing beacons, things like that, to signal that there is someone about to cross. So I really echo that sentiment. Would love the follow-up on that too. And I also have a question about, I'm not an engineer, but the thinking behind the 20 feet versus the 15 feet, if there's any insight you have on that, like what's the difference? And yeah.
So the 15 feet, I'm not sure if we can go back. I don't know if we have a picture of that. In the bulb outs, when we have it's more like here that we have a bulb out. The theory is once you step out onto the bulb out, you need less distance to be able to see that individual, because the bulb out kind of puts it a little further into your line of sight. And so that's why technically, or according to the law, you would potentially need less time to react, because you see it earlier. That person is, or that individual is crossing already on that bulb out. And so that's generally what that means. Okay. When you have like a bulb out and then you have parking behind it, you still need to keep that distance behind that bulb out so that you can park the first car. And then that driver will be able to see as the person approaches before it even goes onto the crosswalk.
Also, if it helps, there are generally in engineering, there's equations essentially that you can input, your speed versus your distance. And so all streets, I don't want to speak too broadly, but streets and freeways in general, a lot of them are designed specifically based on the formulas regarding your distance, your sight distance, and the time, the speed that you're going. So I haven't looked into it, regarding this 20 feet for the daylighting, but I'm assuming that it might be a branch off of some of the formulas that are used for traffic and street design in general.
One comment, the text does say any marked or unmarked crosswalk, so it includes mid-block crossings. And I think Faith's point's important, that those are probably going to be some of the ones that rise up to the top of your list, because those are probably some of the highest impact ones, the mid-block crosswalks.
Yeah, thank you for your input. This is great, so that I'll have all the answers next time. Thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity for us to present this, because this is really important, and for some reason, the community will need to be very well informed, and especially as of next year when the police department can start enforcing and issuing citations. So it's really important for us to spread the word. To appreciate it.
I have a question for clarity on compliance for stop or stand. So like, let's say a right turn lane, like we talked about for a separate issue the month before last. If you're there and there's a stop sign or a red light and you're stopped, or standing on a curb, you know, is that only applied to standing in the street, or just what, or does it mean standing on the sidewalk within 20 feet of the you know?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you?
It says, because you can't, the park part is pretty clear, but stopping or standing, like if you stop to make a right turn, are you in violation? Or if you're standing on the corner, are you in violation?
No, I think it refers, my implication, my, I guess inference is that it implies long-term or longer term. And for example, there are some exceptions, for example, for emergency vehicles, and sometimes even they have like buses and different things on the law description. So my assumption is long-term idling, in that kind of stuff. I don't know what long-term means, but just common sense, I was thinking a longer standing or idling that would block the view for not a second, but a more extended period of time.
Maybe more like double parking.
Yeah.
You parked, you're gonna go run in and pick up your DoorDash and come back out to the car. So you've effectively, parked there illegally, or you're standing there. Or sometimes people will just scooch over to do a quick text or something instead of continuing through the intersection.
Yeah. That would be my interpretation too. Yeah. Dropping something off really quickly, running in, and the car is not attended, that kind of stuff. But that's a good question. I will keep on reading. Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks again, Fabi. So we don't have any callers or online participants who have any questions. So if the committee has no more questions on the daylighting law presentation, can we move forward? I think it was 4 slides, please. There we go. All right, so we can start going into our traffic and pedestrian safety issues. Item number 7. Next slide, please. We've got, again, item number 7A, which is a reminder of our traffic calming policy. The policy can be found at the website that you see on the slide. Again, it's a valuable tool to kind of follow what processes that we kind of go through for each item that's brought up to us. And for the next slide, please. We'll start with item number 7B, traffic issues submitted by citizens. For this meeting, we don't have any new submitted issues. So there are no new updates necessarily for that. Next item, please. Item number 7C is our list of traffic issues discussed and the status. Just a reminder, initially we had a running table with all the issues that we've previously discussed. Just to save space and the table, growth. We've placed it online as an archive for anyone to go back and refer to, or you can also refer to the agenda packet. I believe there should be a section for a list of those issues. But for now, if we can move to the next slide, please. So we are going to walk through some items that we previously had on the table. and discuss some updates that we've had with them. So we'll start with the next slide, please, with item number 5, or at least the item that was referred to as number 5 in the table. The original request was regarding speeding on Nob Hill from between Appian Way to Meadow Park. Currently, it's on the traffic calming policy step 7, which would, as a reminder, is a review by the TAPS committee. Currently, the status is ongoing. The next slide, please. So we're presenting some of our investigations that we found for this segment. If you'll notice, the segment in question is the yellow marked areas. The table, I should say, the bottom black box that says segments. So that's referring to speeds that, again, our previous meeting here, our staff member KJ described a source of data that we have that is based off of essentially cell phone data. So if you're carrying a cell phone and you're driving somewhere, they can collect basically how fast you're going in those segments. So when we produce this segment that we discussed, was it the Nob Hill Avenue from Appian Way to Meadow Park? As you can see, there's a breakdown of speeds from between 15 and 18 miles per hour to 22 miles per hour. As Public Works views this particular set of numbers, we don't have recommendations to implement anything there, because to us the data shows that, the people are not necessarily speeding on average through this section. So we don't have, we recommend that action's not necessarily necessary here. But if we can move to the next slide, please. I'd like to open this item to the committee for discussion and any recommendations.
How long was the data collected for?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I would have to double check what it's based off of as far as the time frame and how long it was collected and added. So it'd be affecting the perception of speeding in the area, or, it's just that since this data is based off an average, you could have essentially people who are bringing down that average or people that are raising that average. So, it's not necessarily like a median speed or the maximum speed. I don't have that information on this slide, unfortunately. But as far as we know, or what's been presented here is, on average, people are not necessarily going over that 25 mile per hour speed limit. And I can't speak for whether, you do have a particular person or persons who are going over 25 through that area.
We also find out if those speeds are median or mean average. Because, like 10 people going 20 and one going 60 would mean a lot of cars going 60, but the average would stay low.
Okay. So just to, for the sake of the presentation's record, KJ submitted a comment saying that the data for these intersections, it's a collection over 2 years worth of data. So it's not a short finding. It sounds like it's over quite a long term. But in future, we can, I'll check if the program will produce the median. Okay.
Over 2 years, is this just like 24 hours a day, or only during certain times of the day?
As long as data is happening, if that makes sense. As long as someone's driving with a cell phone, it should be collecting over time. So, but in a sense, it does show, like, you can gather, oh, this is the average speed during the week. This is the average speed during the weekend. This is the average during the morning commute times versus, not busy times. So, oh, thank you.
Real-time answers.
Okay. And it's all day, Monday through Sunday. So it sounds like, it's not excluding any particular date or time. And it's, I think we can provide the median, but the median would just kind of show, like, in the middle of all of the data points, this is the person. So there's, this is the number, but I think I'm just hesitant to introduce other items simply because there's certain amount of interpretation involved. So if you take the maximum speed, then someone might say, oh, look, somebody is going 50. But if it's one person, who does it every weekend? Does that warrant the same as on average people behave? So I think the discussion might become then whether, beyond that average, do you think there is a reason for the behavior on that particular street?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask if we know the number of unique users that pinged their data into this database. So we know if it was 100 people over the course of 2 years or 50, just to get a sense of, like, how many cell phones were, like, pinged and added to the database. Curious.
I'm honestly not sure because I think there's some kind of, I think there's rules based on anonymity that we might not be able to produce or ask for that information. So, I mean, like you're saying, or I don't know if you're saying that, I might be interpreting, but essentially, there are certain roads that we'll discuss here, obviously, that they don't really go anywhere. So it's probably all of your neighbors. So, there is, I think, the likelihood that a lot of that data is coming from people who live there or frequently visit in these certain areas. Unless it's an arterial road, then it's hard to assume that you'll have, for example, 100 unique, I should say, users or unique people and their data versus, 20 people 5 times, So I think there might be some information regarding, who. I'm not sure if, again, I think there might be something that might show a frequency, but we wouldn't be able to see, particular information of those people. I think, like I said, I think there's a certain amount of, like, privacy law and privacy data and all that kind of stuff that, they'll take the general data of what's happening there, but we as users or people who are trying to use the data, we can't really, I think, break into, oh, hey, like, I know where you live and you keep driving here. But yeah, please.
I think I'm kind of asking the same thing that both these guys are asking, and this is probably more a question for KJ. It just feels, I just wonder if that data, if you could see a distribution of it. A distribution would contain a lot more information than just an average, and I don't know how sophisticated. I don't know anything about this. What do you call it? This data collecting and what they give you and what they don't. If they just give you a number, or if it is more sophisticated and allows you to see a distribution of speeds, or if it gives you all the data, raw data, and you could plug it into a spreadsheet and plot the distribution, or it just seems like could be such a useful tool.
Yeah.
And When I look at 22 miles an hour, if I had to guess an average speed on a street like that, I wouldn't think it would be that low. It just seems surprisingly low. No one drives 22 miles an hour. So,
They're their own neighborhood?
yeah, so I don't know. Just, I guess we could talk about this more with KJ. It just seems like a really helpful piece of software that we could make good use of.
Hi, can you hear me?
If you'd like to, we heard you for a second where you asked if we could hear you.
Okay, perfect. So my name is KJ. I'm the public works specialist. I'm the one who was able to gather the data that you just reviewed. And the data does show a variety of different data points. I know that Member Crystal and Member Doyle mentioned, the amount of vehicles driving through the roadway. The data can provide us with the average vehicles that use the road, as well as turning movements. They can also provide us, how many vehicles are entering a certain point to the affected area that the resident has brought up to us. So all that data is available. And what we just wanted to present was just the speeding aspect, since that was the main component of the complaint. And to answer Vice Chair Moriarty's question regarding the speeding on Nob Hill, fortunately for this particular road, there are a lot of dips in the road that are used for stormwater drainage. So it greatly reduces the speed of vehicles. And if they speed too much, then they're most likely going to bottom out and damage their vehicles. So that might be why you're seeing on this particular stretch of road that the speed is around 22 miles an hour. Which I hope answers your questions.
I had one question about the average speed. You were talking about dips. I don't know if there's stop signs on that. I was wondering if the way the average speed is calculated, if it looks at all the times the car is moving. So when it's slowing down for a stop sign, if there's stop signs when it's starting up again. So the average wouldn't be the average speed that cars are moving when they're moving, or it would, like any slowing down or accelerating, if that's all included, it would bring the average down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it doesn't show, where they're slowing down or where they're speeding it up. It only provides the data per segment. So Mia, can you move to the previous slide? So each of those colored areas on the roadway are considered segments. So during the beginning of Sunnyview to, it's a little hard to see on my screen, to the next street, that would be considered one segment. So the system, from my understanding, takes the average between each segment that is being traveled through. So vehicles are, is slowing down between dips or speed bumps, it's going to greatly reduce that average. And case in point is that these traffic control measures that we have already in place on this particular road already prove that, you know, traffic calming devices do work in slowing down traffic. Does it slow down everyone? Probably not. There are always going to be a few outliers there in the public that are driving through the roadways at high speeds, or what we consider high speeds as a pedestrian watching them drive by. But for the vast majority of motorists that are driving through this roadway, it appears that a majority of them are following the speed limit. And I encourage TAPS members to, you know, go out to this particular area. You will see that if vehicles are parked on both sides on Nob Hill, it greatly narrows the travel lanes, which forces a lot of vehicles to slow down to oncoming traffic. So that might also play a role in the speed limits on this particular section here.
I mean, so yeah, I mean, it would be cool to get top speed data to sort of get to what you were talking about. If difference between the time it would take to go at one average speed from point A to point B and how it was actually done. But I mean, I want to thank the city staff and the committee. I think it's a bad look if, you know, citizens are bringing concerns to us and we're just like, well, we looked and it's not true what you said. So I love that we're all really diving into it and trying to get to the bottom of it. And you know, that's the best we can do. And if we get it wrong, you know, I'd invite the community who's seeing it to please report again, call in, you know, set us straight.
So with that discussion in mind, do you guys have recommendations today, or would you like to make recommendations at another date? It's a matter of, I guess, how we want to move this item number through, or you guys can make a motion if you'd like for whether you think any traffic calming measures need to be taken in addition to what's happening there now, or if you consider this item potentially closed and something that can be reintroduced if the problem persists. It's what are your decision?
I think I feel like we're still a little blind and there's not enough information to really make any decision, because we really don't understand how these averages work, and there's no top, like he said, no top speed information. I guess I wouldn't feel comfortable making any decision based on this data because I don't really understand. I'll understand it. KJ gave a great explanation, but there's still some parts of how the summary data comes together that we don't understand as far as the average.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think also, since this is a change to our process as a committee, it feels quite new, and it feels like we're potentially setting a precedent, and it just feels like a really big decision to make tonight. So I'll just go ahead and move to table this particular project.
Would the city consider testing this out, so to speak, by putting the stealth out for like 4 days and see if the data collected that way, you know, mirrors what we've got here, or, you know, just kind of as a baseline, so to speak, because the cell phone data to me seems a little more dubious. and a little more subject to interpretation, and how we've been trying to get to the bottom of, well, what does this data really tell us? Whereas the stealth, pretty much, there's no, they roll over the little cord and it's pretty much what it is. So I don't know if that's something the city would be willing to do, just as a comparison, so we can see if, you know, the data's kind of matching up between the two systems of collection.
Okay, I'll ask. Ultimately, I think we have to request that, you know, someone to set that up. So I'll put it on our our task list for checking out if we can for these particular sections. And I have a feeling this might cross through to some of the next items too. So if that is something that we can do for the other intersections, then I'll look into putting here's the stealth request. Okay. Or were there any other bits of data that might, or questions I should say, that you might need in future items or future committee meetings that would kind of help the decision process before I move on to the next item? Okay. All right. For the next, thank you. For item, again, number 7C, this is for issue number 17. The original request, again, is related to speeding, but on Tennant Avenue, and they requested to add a speed bump near Fernandez Park. Again, it's on current step C, traffic calming step C, I should say, and its current status is ongoing. If we can move to the next slide, please. Again, we're presenting, we might have some of the same questions, so I anticipate that, so no worries. Again, we have the image of Tennant Avenue. It looks like between San Pablo and extending to Quadra Court. So essentially when you leave San Pablo and you're driving towards and past Fernandez Park, the segments, as you can see, are slower towards San Pablo and slower. I'm assuming the stop sign there on, where can I see that street?
Where the church is.
Yeah. So I think that might answer some questions as far as the data's behavior on whether it's capturing when people's speeds are changing as opposed to, you know, stopping, accelerating, slowing down, etc. So you could see, again, a behavior here. And, you know, just from being on Tennant Avenue a lot, there's a couple of stop signs. So they seem to coincide with the lower speed, should say, you know, the speed that's being traveled with. So again, the maximum seems to cap out around 22 miles per hour on this road. And again, that looks to us, again, that it's under the speed limit and that there is the behavior of people slowing down and not necessarily speeding all the way through this segment. So we don't have recommendations to, you know, implement any further traffic calming measures unless, if we'd like to move to the next slide, please.
I just wanted to, I think what you said it well. We're learning how to interpret this data. So if a car's going 30 and then slows down to a stop sign and goes 0 and then goes back up to 30 again, this data is going to show the average is like 16. But if you look at another way of collecting data, like Faith was saying, where you have those, what do you call that thing?
It's a stealth.
You're looking at at one spot, what are the speeds that people travel? So it's another, it's telling you what is the speed at a certain spot versus averaging in stop signs and, okay.
I mean, and to be fair, it's impossible to have data without interpretation. And so I think we want to feel comfortable with, oh, the data is speaking loudly apart from any possible interpretation. But, you know, again, you know, I want to say, you know, sometimes too, some of these items can be down to interpretation in and of itself because, you know, for example, if people are accelerating quickly from a stop sign, cars these days tend to be really loud and they give the feeling that people are driving recklessly. And they give the feeling that, oh, they must be speeding down here. We want people to just drive calmly, accelerate at a normal pace. So it's hard for, I can see the issue in that I don't know if that's happening. So if I were just to look at the averages, to me, I'm like, you know what, people seem to not be traveling above the speed limit. But for someone to complain about it, obviously there has to be a perception that issue is there. So again, I think it boils down to, you know, are we addressing the public's issue with that? Has the data spoken and, you know, things have, you know, settled in that way? Or, you know, if, for example, the committee, as, you know, like we mentioned before, you're kind of like an advocate for what the people's issues are throughout the city. I mean, if there is room for an alternate, how you say, like an alternate solution, then obviously, you know, we can hear it. But again, I don't want to take away this discussion from you guys.
One last thing, I think what Ben said was helpful as I think about it more. If you knew the average top speed, that would be, if you could pull that out of this data, and if you knew the average top speed, that would be
May I ask, and please, I can see how my question might sound rude, and I don't want it to. Forgive me from in advance. If we produced the top speed that someone drove on that street at a given time, does that change what your decision would be? Like, for example, say it's the one person who lives on, I don't know, let's pick Orleans. I'm not trying to pick on anybody. You know, say there's somebody who lives somewhere up Tennant and they're the same person, and it's that one person who goes like 40 miles an hour as opposed to 25. And it's one outlier, you know, or several outliers.
I think
Does that change your decision?
the question is not an individual vehicle's top speed. It was the average of all the vehicles, what their top speeds are,
Yeah,
as opposed to their average speed, which includes 0.
yeah.
So then my understanding of the question then might be wrong, but the average speeds, so this is an average. So when I say that this is an average, it's taking into account the top speed and it's taking into account the lowest speed. So this average already includes, you know, because that's what an average is. It takes the array of numbers and then, you know, you break it down by the number of participants, if you want to call it that. So
I think what he's saying is, if you looked at a segment, there's going to be a top speed that a vehicle travels on that segment.
do you want the
And if
upper
you took-
range?
Yeah, the
of-
top.
Okay.
So, and if you took the average of all the top speeds, so maybe on one of these segments, maybe everyone tends to go slow for most of it, but maybe there's a section where people typically drive 40. But you wouldn't see that in this presentation of the data. But if you captured the top speed for the whole section and averaged the top speed for every driver, then you would know kind of, you would know how fast cars are traveling on average at the speediest bits.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so can we go back one slide, please? So thank you for Thank you to the person who's managing the slide movement. So again, like KJ said, the data here is broken up into segments, and I think it's assumed between, basically if there's a segment between an two intersections, the data is broken up between those intersections. So the highest, if you look at this picture, the highest would be the bright yellow. Those are the areas that are that people are going the top speeds at. So it looks like the back end of Tennant towards Quadricourt. It looks like between Orleans and Quadricourt, and between, oh, I wish those streets were marked because I don't remember what they are at the top of my head.
But if you only look at, if one view is to look at the top speed, then you'd eliminate the effect of stop signs and dips and all that. You'd be capturing the highest speed that every car goes, and you'd average all those.
Okay.
So then you'd be seeing, well, I guess I said the section of road that sees the highest speed, and you wouldn't have to worry about how many dips or stop signs or stop lights or anything there were.
Okay. Well, KJ
what
and
you're
I
asking,
can
right,
can.
You said it better than I did, I think.
Yeah, I think we just need to understand the data that we're being presented, because you could drive 50 miles an hour for 2 seconds and have that sandwiched in between lower speeds and come up with an average of 20 miles an hour. And so we're trying to figure out how high of a velocity are cars traveling for any period of time on those stretches of road.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, generally, I think that information would be helpful when we're looking at a project that, or a concern that's specifically around speeding. So you want to understand the top of the range versus the average, like
Right.
the middle, right?
Because when you get a speeding ticket, you can't tell the officer, but I was going really slow on the previous
Okay.
2
block.
seconds
And so
ago.
if you average it, it was,
Okay.
you get in trouble for speeding.
Okay. I'll work with KJ to see if we can break down how the data is provided and if it can show what you guys are kind of asking for. So we'll work on that, see if we can provide an answer by the next meeting. If not, we might need a little bit more time, but okay.
I also have a general question just about like the information and the data that we're trying to interpret, in this meeting. So for this particular concern, they're requesting a speed bump. So should we as committee members be thinking about the costs of the solutions that are being put forward by the residents, but also by staff, right? To the point earlier about limited resources, if the 4 or 5 projects that we're considering tonight completely blow the budget for, what we have for a year, then we don't have capacity to hear other concerns. So should we also be kind of taking that into consideration?
I think my answer would be that you can, but ultimately, so the idea, I think ultimately after all of these movements, or motions are, set towards a solution, say, for example, you guys recommend like, yeah, we really think we should implement, I don't know, a new stop sign or a new traffic beacon or something like that. You guys would make your recommendation, I believe, and then we, as Public Works, would go back and try and break down what the cost would be to produce that project. And then I think ultimately it's just taken to council. So, if it is a budget question, the question would be taken to council for them to approve or disapprove or make the, budget available for that. So I wouldn't say that, budget means we can't do anything ever.
Sure.
But I think the question would be like, where on the scale can we use the budget? So I think it's better to potentially, if you really believe there's a need, or if the public is really, really asking for it, then I think it's better to establish that solution, establish what the cost will be, and at least have something to present to council to try and move that particular solution forward. So I don't want anything to be shot in the water before we even get to discuss it. So I would keep it open to discussion. And if at some point, we're told that we can't do it, then we can't do it. But at least we've done our due diligence to get it to that point. And if there's a plan that we can add it to another point or what have you, then, I think there's outlets potentially. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think what I'm realizing from the first concern that we were kind of talking through versus this one is that the one we're talking about now, residents have requested a speed bump. So there is a solution that they would like to see potentially, but the previous concern didn't have a clear solution. And so just trying to understand what information we have and how we make our decisions.
Yeah, I think if there's a concern that's been brought forth, I think part of the process, again, from the traffic calming process, part of it is a review and an exploration of solutions. So I think in those cases, there's the exploration of solutions between Public Works and your recommendations as a committee. And then in the ones that do have, a specific item, in this case, they want a speed bump. If we say as Public Works, based on the data or how we interpret it, the speed bump isn't necessary, you as a committee can still let us know, like, hey, we think it's still necessary. Then we can go through the other steps where, the 60% of the neighborhood's approval, especially wherever this bump falls in front of the, whichever particular house. And then again, that's something that we can, present to council. I think, if, again, I don't want to leave it closed where, if you have some alternate solution, as opposed to, just the speed bump, I don't want to leave that untouched either. But for this item, number 17, just to be clear, it sounds like there's just some data clarity that you guys want before making a decision on this one. Okay. All right, if we can go to the next slide and then the slide after. Thank you. Another item is number 18. The original request was that drivers are not stopping at Terra Hills and Kildare and Shawn Avenue. Again, we're at current step 7, and the status is ongoing. If we can go to the next slide. This is one that we discussed previously, and I think we just included some pictures that the markings have been refreshed. So in previous discussions of these intersections, there was a recommendation that the pretty much the traffic markings says to be redone a little bit. I guess the concern was that they were faded and potentially people weren't stopping because they couldn't see them. So we just wanted to update the striping has been refreshed, and we've included photos of that work having been completed. So this was the stop signs that refreshed at Terra Hills Drive and Shawn Drive. If we move to the next slide, there was a visual inspection of signs and markings performed at Kildare Drive and Terra Hills Drive, and a work order has been created to refresh the striping there. So in the previous slide, the striping has been refreshed at Terra Hills and Shawn, but the work order was created for Terra Hills and Kildare. And that's our update. Next slide. There's room for any committee discussions or recommendations on that particular item.
Just looking at the pictures, it seems that if the problem persists, that those places would be good candidates to install high visibility crosswalk. Instead of just the standard, white lines, we could, put in the zebra stripes or, the blocking pattern that might be a little more attention grabbing for drivers to, if they're not seeing the stop sign, to see all that big block of paint in the street. It's just something to throw out there if we're not seeing an improvement with this restriping.
Okay, I've taken note of that. If anybody else has any comments or recommendations, we can move to the next item. Okay, next slide, please. So this is still item number 7C. We're at issue number 20. The original request was the installation of stop markings and crosswalks along Ramona between Lucas Avenue and Santa Barbara Drive, plus speed enforcement. Again, we're on current step 7, with the current status is ongoing. Next slide, please. This is another one that, we have our data on. And as far as the numbers go, it looks like from these averages, there's a segment that is there's a couple segments that are slightly above the speed limit. So this one I think is more open to recommendations and discussion between the committee and Public Works about potentially putting the stop markings or crosswalks along these areas. So the next slide is just going to show, again, your committee discussion recommendations, but we can leave it on this slide if it helps during your discussions to not take it off the slide that has the picture and the data on it. But does the committee have any discussion or recommendations, questions, concerns?
I'd like to add this to number 5 and 17 is, more clarity on how to interpret the data. And then follow up.
The request is for installation of stop markings and crosswalks. Does that mean they want a stop sign put in or they want the paint refreshed?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I can try and see if there's something that's existing as far as the stop markings. To me, the installation of stop markings, I think it implies new stop markings and crosswalks, if I'm not mistaken.
So you mean putting a stop sign where there currently is not a stop sign?
I believe so. During your discussion, I'll open up a map and see if I can see anything that's existing, but I don't quite have that for sure right now. According to Google Maps, there seems to be striping for crosswalk and for stop marking, so it could be a refresher request.
At what intersection are you looking at?
Ramona Street and Lucas Avenue.
So that's at the end, so there is control down there. There is stop sign and crosswalk.
From what I see, yes. I can look for, what is this? They said between Santa Barbara.
Well, Carmelita would be in between, and that one doesn't have markings or a stop sign. It'd be Carmelita's in between Santa Barbara and Lucas.
Okay. Yes, KJ, go ahead.
Yes, for this particular issue, the resident requested striping and stop signs on the side streets. I believe that's Carmelita and Santa Barbara. And they were concerned about the speeding on Ramona. So they were also requesting additional striping or stop markings or any type of traffic controlling or traffic calming devices along Ramona as well. Thank you.
Thank you, KJ.
I had a question about stop signs. There's some constraints about stop signs, right? You can't just, Public Works couldn't just put a stop sign anywhere they wanted. Aren't there some requirements that have to be, I don't know, certain traffic volumes or speeds or something to be able to install a stop sign?
Yeah, there would be some analysis. So you look at, like you said, traffic volume. Again, I guess the speed is into account of what's behaving there, and then how you're affecting the through drive of the area. So I think there might also be some potential like approval from the people who live on that street. Again, kind of similar to the speed bump issue. So I think there is that outlet, you know, for analyzing whether you can put new stop signs or what have you. But, you know, I guess this is part of the step to get there.
In the past, when there have been requests to install a stop sign, there had to be a formal speed study. There needed to be a traffic engineer come out and do a formal analysis. Yeah, we can't just stick it out there, but it seems like there might be some other options, you know, with paint, like a road diet or something to give, you know, to do some traffic calming without putting the stop sign in. And when we have in the past had folks want the stop sign, these chambers were filled with people who do not want a stop sign. So I don't think it's the get all to end all. And yeah, so I think we need to also just be thinking about other options, you know, besides the stop sign, beside the speed hump, that are, you know, other things that we can consider trying to realistically get done.
I actually think that would be a great future agenda item to kind of understand, like, what are the different traffic calming strategies that we can look into. Speaking from a non-engineer, you know, that would be helpful. I think if we could have like a couple of slides, just really high level, going over what those different options are. I think that will help empower us to understand what we can actually do, what's feasible, because it sounds like even with stop signs, there are lots of restrictions and formal studies that need to happen. And I think having it in this venue at a future meeting could also be empowering for residents to understand what their options are. So as we're seeing like some inconsistencies with what residents are requesting, I think it'll help them also understand, like, there are more things than just stop signs that can be deployed.
Okay, I've taken note of that. Are there any more comments or recommendations before moving on from this item? Okay. All right, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is an item, again, we're still on item number 7C. This is traffic issue number 21. We've discussed previously, there was a request for the installation of a right turn only sign at the intersection of Appian Way, Terra Hills Drive, and Canyon Drive. It's currently on step 11, which is implementation and follow-up, and the current status is complete. We have this item here again just to show, as opposed to getting recommendations, we've already implemented what was requested. Just as a refresher, there's a right turn lane on Appian that turns onto Terra Hills Drive. The caller or the resident was concerned that people were driving through the right turn lane and then merging into the straight traffic. So next slide, please. City staff updated the channelizing line for the right turn pocket. Originally, it was a dashed line. It's now solid to let people know that it's not a traffic or a lane changing or lane. They installed approximately 180 linear feet of red curb along with no parking signage and installed a right turn only sign. If you go to the next slide, please. This slide and the next one will show essentially what was completed. We have a sky view of the solid line, the red curbing so that no one's parking on this through street, and the I'm not sure if you can see it clearly, but the right turn only sign. So the striping in that area was refreshed and a new sign was added. Next slide, please. That's the picture of the right turn only sign that was newly added, and you can also see the refreshed red curb right there. So next slide, please. We've got issue number 90, or issue number 23. My apologies. The original request was for a speed bump installation at 2467 Calusa Street at light pole 351. Current step is 7, and the current status is ongoing. If we move to the next slide, please. We are also faced with the data as previously submitted for the other items. This section also shows that the segment has an average speed through this area of 20 miles per hour. We, as the Public Works, has reached out to the original submitter that they can still do the petition through their block for the 60% approval if they'd like to move forward with the bump. And we haven't received any response yet. So with that item, we've potentially reached out to that person, and then the data again kind of suggests that the speeding on average is not necessarily an issue there, so we don't have any other recommendations. But again, I'd like to open the floor to the committee for any discussion or recommendations here.
I guess since there was no petition signed, I guess it shouldn't even really be to step 7, right? If there hasn't been a petition signed by 60% of the residents.
So through the traffic calming process, there's opportunity for this petition before the TAPS committee review and after. So during engineering analysis, if a petition signed by 60% of the renters or owners, allowing one signature per residence on the impacted block is submitted to Public Works Department requesting additional traffic analysis, a neighborhood traffic study will be prepared, which reviews accident history and conducts appropriate studies. Is basically introducing what you guys were mentioning earlier regarding stop signs and, that kind of implementation. And then a report would be prepared. So in our case, the issue has been submitted, but the petition hasn't been signed. So as Public Works, we don't have the summary or traffic study, but we can still, introduce it to the TAPS committee for discussion or recommendation. And then after that, we can also do, consideration by the neighborhood. So there's a little bit of I don't want to say a blur, but there's a little bit of a combination, I think, of 6, 7, and 8, where, if the petition for, I think not just a bump, but any particular traffic calming measure, if that petition were implemented and provided to us even before the initial, as part of the initial complaint, I think that potentially has us, we can either do the studies, we can go over your recommendation, or, a neighborhood discussion. So it I think kind of melds the three because they kind of need each other a little bit. But in this case, again, this is kind of more of the floor for you guys if there's any discussion or recommendations on this one, or if you'd prefer to wait until the submitter actually gets this petition, we can move forward. But I don't want to make any decisions for you.
I know it's a long and growing list, but I
Yeah.
think this should be added to the ones that we get more information about whether they're speeding or not by learning to understand what kind of data is available.
All right. Anything? Do you guys basically agree? I don't want to jump over anybody.
Yeah, I just a little bit confused about whether or not a petition is necessary to. I'm just kind of confused about, like, visually, by the time it gets to us, what has happened, and it sounds like there's a little bit of, like, a petition can happen or it can happen afterwards. I'm just trying to understand that more. So I'll look into that for my own clarification. But it sounds like these numbers don't necessarily happen in this particular order. Is that right?
If I'm 100% honest, it should happen in this order, but
Okay.
sometimes when the public isn't 100% aware of the process, they'll sometimes skip a few steps, or things sometimes can be pushed one way or the other. And I think for the sake of just organization, it should best go through the process. But I don't think we want to push down or slap anything around if somebody happened to have gotten to that point already.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the fluidity of the process, because concerns can come to us via a citizen coming to this meeting and raising a concern about an issue, and then that would get added to the list, right? So they didn't necessarily go through steps 1 through 6, but here they are at our committee meeting. So I think I get that. Yep.
I guess it's just us having to kind of, I don't want to say go with the flow of things, but, ideally we'd go through the process, like you said, as that kind of fluid motion 1 through 11. But I think we just need to adapt, I guess, as things come along. But if sometimes when the public feels very strongly about something, they might jump to that 60% petition immediately, and then, the steps in between kind of become a little bit moot. But I think that's fusion, but I think that's why sometimes it hops around, it feels like. But yeah, if you guys have any more recommendation on this item, I can move to the next one, or if you would like to say anything else. Okay. All right, next slide, please. Yeah. So those were the items that we had updates with. Most of them were updates regarding the data that was pulled for each of those segments. So that closes item number 7C, and we're moving on to item number 7D, issues related to Caltrans right-of-way. There are no new updates on those issues, but I believe those issues can also be found in the same place as we have the other archived items. But again, we'd like to remind the public to report Caltrans issues at the website provided on this slide. And they might have their own processes to address or answer those issues. If we move to the next slide, please. I'd like to open the floor to staff updates. We're on item number 8. If we move to the next slide, please. We normally would have a update from the police department. Unfortunately, I don't think they were able to attend today. So we can move to the next slide. For CIP projects, we have no new items to report. Next slide, please. For development projects, again, all development projects are currently under review. And you can make your comments to the Planning Commission by visiting the website that is on the slide. Again, these projects are typically updated on this website on what stage they are during the planning process. And again, if you have any questions, there should be contact information for the Planning Commission. Next slide, please. Item number 8D for the active transportation plan. Again, we have the Walk and Roll Pinole website for you to visit anything ATP related. As far as the draft status, the draft is complete and it's been distributed for comments. So I believe the commission, you have the time to review the draft and provide any comments that you have to Public Works. And then for anyone else, the draft is also available on walkandrollpinole.com. So for anybody who wants to review what that draft is or what it's about, you should be able to review it there and submit comments.
I had a comment about it. What I envision is this group discussing it and kind of providing some comments. And maybe we don't like vote on anything, but I would expect that council would expect that before it gets to them, TAPS as a body has kind of talked about it. Not just us individually sending comments to Public Works. But I think we at our next meeting on the agenda, we should just spend some time talking about it and see what comes of that discussion. And we should have on the PowerPoint here the draft, so we could kind of be able to go to, say, somebody says, I want to look at page whatever, and it says this, and just, because I had some concerns, but I'd feel better if this whole, I had some thoughts, but I'd feel better if I got to interact with everybody here and get everybody's thoughts and see what came of that. Do you guys envision something similar?
I think that it's been proposed for the agenda a few times, but hasn't happened, right? The active transportation plan, reviewing it, maybe getting a presentation on it and then discussing it?
Yeah. Or we don't know, yeah, we've gotten a presentation, but now we have the actual draft. So a presentation would be fine. I don't really feel like I need it. But I don't want to just read it myself and as an individual send my comments to Public Works. I want to talk about it with you guys and just see what, it just feels like I get more insight and better ideas when we all kind of talk together. And I want an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I agree, and my question was around what is the remaining schedule for adoption of the plan? So comments are due early December. What does it look like after that point? And at what is the target date for the meeting, for the plan to go to council for adoption for the city?
I believe the general idea is that comments are provided by the date, and I assumed it was about a month or so of time. I unfortunately don't have dates necessarily, so I think the comments are provided to the group that produced the draft based off of previous data and previous comments. So I think they take the new comments based off the draft, and they see how that they're best implemented or what have you. So I think they take that time to do that, and then once that's pretty much established, I think it's for the next council that they had time to add it to the agenda. So I mean, I am assuming it could be anywhere December or January potentially, but I don't have hard set dates.
An early December deadline for comments would be too early for this group to get to participate. Is there an official deadline for comments?
December 6th.
Yeah, I think I would, if it can be done informally and we can just request that it be delayed long enough to give us time to at least talk about it during one meeting. If it can't be done informally, I'd want to make a motion just to make sure that deadline happens after we get a chance to talk about it. What do you think? Do we?
I'm gonna be honest, I really don't know. I'm not sure if we can or can't delay it, so.
Couldn't we make it, but to be on the safe side, then I'd like to, I think it would be ridiculous if this group never talked as a group about the active transportation plan, and then it went to council, and council said, what do you guys think? And we'll say, well, we never talked about it. I'd say, well, what do you guys exist for? So I would like to make a motion that we get to talk about it at our next, that the deadline occur after our next TAPS meeting, so that, or after we get a chance, after the next TAPS meeting, and that it be on the agenda at the next TAPS meeting, so we get to talk about it.
And
So to be clear, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, to add to that, if our December 11 TAPS meeting is a way for then the consultant team that's working on the plan to actively take what we're saying, so that way we don't have to submit it separately, but this is our feedback as a committee. I think that would be, I think, to your point about making sure that we can get our feedback in there, as opposed to individually reviewing it and sending in our comments, that would be great. So if the consultant team could be here that evening.
Okay. So, just for clarity, Kent is making a motion to request that the deadline for comment submittal to occur after the next TAPS meeting, to provide the time for you to discuss during that TAPS meeting. And I'm not sure, are we wanting to add that the consultant be available as part of the motion? I mean, I can't promise it, but,
If their schedule allows.
okay.
Yep, I accept that amendment to the emotion.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Friendly amendment.
Yep,
So if Kent makes a motion for pushing the deadline for comments to occur after the next TAPS meeting, does anyone second that motion?
and that we put it on the agenda for the next TAPS.
Oh, and put it on the agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay, so let's run through. Sorry. So Kent Moriarty makes the motion, Crystal Pascoe seconds. Committee member Ben Doyle,
Aye.
Chair Faith Denham Sims.
Aye.
Again, member Kent Moriarty.
Aye.
Again, member Crystal Pascoe.
Yes.
Okay. Motion passed. Okay, so with that being said, we can move to item number 8E. Oh, yes?
Can you talk to the consultant just to make sure that what we're thinking gets communicated, so they aren't planning on, like, I just worry about some disconnect and then it's gonna be, oh, sorry, too late, and,
Okay.
yeah.
I can try talking to him. I'll see if I can give at least one of their members. I think they have a team, so I need to see where they all are. But I can try giving a email and a phone call or something.
I'm sure they
See
get
how it works.
paid when certain gates get crossed, and they want to get this draft approved so that they get some payment released. So they might be
Yeah,
a little resistant, but
Yeah, and to be honest, it's difficult as a consultant just because, their time or presence equals, another bill.
yeah.
So I don't want to promise anything without first discussing with them, see what our options are, as far as having them available for the next TAPS meeting, and then, I'll see what their vision was for accepting the comments, and then, how they plan to put them in there. So,
Is it also possible to have some flexibility with our agenda if they have some time constraints, putting them towards the top of the agenda so that way they can head out when we're done, as opposed to we're like an hour, almost two into the meeting and we're just now talking about the ATP.
Yeah, if they're agreeable or if it works with their schedule and they prefer a specific time of the meeting, we can probably adjust the agenda as it goes, but I can only check and then try and confirm first. Item number 8E, grants update. Again, the grant that we are currently waiting on a status from the county is the Contra Costa County Safe Streets and Roads for All. Again, this grant would be implemented towards our Pinole Valley Road rehabilitation project. Next slide, please. Again, this slide is information on who you can contact if you have any maintenance or service requests that are seen throughout the city. There's an email here, pwservicerequests@pinole.gov. And you also can visit the website, www.pinole.gov. There's a section for services, contact us and report a problem. I think it'll let you actually submit your request electronically through their system. Next slide, please. We're on item number 10, TAPS committee contacts. Again, for your committee members that you see here tonight, there are their email addresses if you need to contact them, listed on the screen here. On the next slide, please. With that, would the chair like to adjourn to the next meeting?
Yes, I would just also like to say thank you to all of our veterans for serving our country, and we will adjourn till December 11th, 2024, 6 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.